Well, hi there, I'm Professor Santiago Molina again, Professor of Anatomy and Physiology here at TCC, and today we're going to be talking about the skull. So when looking at the skull, we first have to recognize that there are two areas of the skull that are recognizable. The first area is the cranium, as you can see it in the video through the areas that I'm covering with my hands. These are the bones that cover the brain, particularly. The cranium is that first area. And then you have the facial bones, which include the mandible. And so the mandible would actually fit underneath it. Those are facial bones. So we're leaving the mandible out for a second for ease of display. So let's go over the bones of the cranium first. They're fairly straightforward and they're the largest ones. The cranial bones are pretty much flat, but slightly curved to give the shape of the cranium that covers the roundness of the brain. So towards the front, a very easy name is the frontal bone. The frontal bone is obviously the bone that you kind of observe on everybody's forehead. So the frontal bone is actually limited on the posterior end by a coronal suture. Bones of the cranium will join each other by sutures. And then, as you look at it here, those sutures between the bones, the longitudinal suture, just posterior to the frontal bone, divides these two bones that we see here that are known as the parietal bones. The parietal bones are going to be towards the posterior end, but not all the way to the posterior end, because at the posterior end you see the occipital bone, which is limited by the lambdoidal suture that you see right here. Okay? So the occipital bone, and as you rotate and look at the inferior side, you will see the occipital bone has features such as the foramen magnum, the occipital condyles, right here, and of course they connect to the sides with the temporal bones, all right, and at the anterior end with the parietal bones. So when we focus mostly on the temporal bone, located here on the lateral side, the temporal bone borders with the parietal on the superior side and with the occipital on the posterior side, with the sphenoid bone on the anterior side. It has several features that are important, including this process that connects to the zygomatic bone of the face. That's known as the zygomatic process, and that process forms the zygomatic arch. On the posterior inferior side of the temporal bone, we have this large protrusion known as the mastoid process, which allows for many of the muscles of the neck to connect to the skull. And then this little needle-like process called the styloid process, which also connects to some of the muscles of the neck. Furthermore, as you rotate in, you will see that there is like a little fossa where the mandible will connect to. So you can see when looking at a mandible where it actually connects to right there. So the mandibular fossa. So as we look at the interior of the cranial area, we will recognize the occipital bone, the temporal bones, but then there's this bone that is not so easily seen, and I'd like to point it out separately right here. This is the sphenoid bone. So it would fit right in there. Okay? So this is the portion that you see right here of this sphenoid bone. The sphenoid bone looks literally like a little bird when you look at it. It has wings, all right, and then maybe the feet of the bird, but it has certain features that are characteristic. Number one, that it has two sets of wings, larger ones called the greater wings, and then narrower and smaller ones that are called the lesser wings. So you can see it on both views, anterior and now posterior. And then there's this little indentation where the pituitary gland sits, known as the sella turcica. Okay. Another feature is that you will also see the optic nerve foramen that are going to be in these openings that you see right there. So this would make the sphenoid bone, but on the skull itself is embedded to the other bones, so it's not so easy to see all of those features. Another bone on the inside that we can only see when we look at the interior of the cranium is this little bone called the ethmoid bone. The ethmoid bone, seen here, separated, okay, is a bone that it's kind of small but has lots of little folds where the nasal conchae are actually located. As you place it in its kind of like natural position, either facing front this way, anteriorly, you will see that it has this little crest called the crista galli, means the cock's crest, and lots of openings that form sinuses that allow for fluids to be in, and that sometimes is the reason why we have sinus headaches and issues like that. So the ethmoid bone also has a little plate. It's thin. You don't see it in this view. You would have to cut across it, but you can see little openings there where I'm pointing to. Those are the openings through what is known as the cribriform plate. The cribriform plate allows the axons of olfactory nerve, cranial nerve number 1, to come through from the nasal epithelium to the olfactory bulbs.